Hold up. All right. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Third Hour of Power. This is Grady of This Mormon Life, and this week I'm joined again by my friend Tommy. Tommy, tell me a little bit about you and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm a few things right now. I'm a college student. I also work, and I'm also trying to launch a new blog and podcast called Following with Purpose. And it's basically just about trying to tell stories, my own stories and other people's stories about how we've overcome difficult experiences in our lives and how to find meaning from failures and other obstacles that we face in our life. So I'm in the process of trying to get that rolling. It's been a long process, but it's gonna happen hopefully sooner than later. But I appreciate being back with you here today.
Good. Yeah, we were talking a little bit offline, just the idea of wanting to make sure you have good content, and making sure you've got some ideas. But I've read your first couple of posts, and I don't think that's going to be a problem. You've got great content there, especially when it comes to when we fall short and getting back up again, learning about, what happened to us.
Right. Yeah. Well, I appreciate that. Thanks.
Well, this week we're talking about Chapter 8 of the Howard W. Hunter Manual. The Third Hour of Power, it's a podcast and other medium formats where we talk about the teachings of the presidents of the church and their second and third Sunday lessons. This week's Chapter 8, which is taking the gospel to all the world. More or less the idea is that this lesson's on missionary work. This is what you're going to get out of this lesson, probably. Tommy, why don't you lead us off? Tell me.
So I just was saying with this lesson, you kind of hear missionary work a lot, and sometimes I kind of think of the same old thing, just inviting people to church, trying to get them to come to mutual or activities, things like that. But I like this lesson a lot because there's so much more about missionary work that I kind of got out of it. It's about having conversations with people about the gospel, but it doesn't have to just be about us trying to preach to them or saying we're right, you're wrong type of attitude, but it's more of just engaging and having discussions about other people's beliefs, our beliefs, and finding similarities. And one thing that Howard W. Hunter quotes George Albert Smith, and he says, "We have come not to find fault with you, nor to criticize you. Keep all the good that you have, and let us bring you more good." And I really like that approach to missionary work of engaging in conversations and trying to find things that other people have similarities, and then adding to that, and increasing their understanding of Christ and His gospel.
Yeah, and it was interesting just this week. The spokesperson for the church, I can't remember. It's not Brother Otterson, is it? I feel like that was the old person.
Yeah, the name sounds familiar. I can't remember the new guy though.
Anyways, the English one, but he was just speaking about boundaries and the church, and I thought it was about ward boundaries and that kind of stuff. But it was actually about how the church has done a really good job and has kind of changed the way that they interact with their community. A lot of times the church was pretty isolated in the good that they did, but how we're really trying to reach out to everyone and to work with other faiths and say, hey, like you're saying, this is what you're doing to help other people. This is what we do to help other people. If we can work together, we can get so much more done than just doing our own thing. And I like what you've kind of talked there too. It's just about wanting to be genuine with what we do.
Yeah, and I work at a Christian school, which is pretty cool because most people there have a belief in Christ, and some people don't, but majority do, and they have chapel services they offer at the we can go to like once a month, and anyway, so I get the opportunity to talk about Christ a lot at work, and it's really I've had experiences where I work mostly with LDS people. Now I'm working with just a lot of different Christian faiths, and it's really fun to be able to hear what they do and what the good they do in the world. Like one of my coworkers just did this charity bike ride down to Mexico where people donated money and then they built houses when they got down there, and but then to tell about my experiences as a missionary or things that we're doing currently in our ward to help other people and things like that. And it's, to me, I feel like that is building a lot of bridges and a lot of like you said, genuine connections about faith and sharing our faiths together, and not me necessarily just, hey, you want to come get baptized right now, and which is still important. I still think we need to. That's a part of it, but I think building those relationships and building bridges is important as well.
Yeah, well, I was having a discussion with my coworkers the other day about MLMs and how I am not a huge fan of them. I pretty much don't like them. And we were also talking about the reason I don't like MLMs because sometimes I like the product they might be offering.
Yeah.
But I just don't like the business practice that usually what you do is have to exploit your friends and family in order to sell something.
Mm.
And a lot of times you create these fake friendships in order to sell your product.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And we were kind of joking about with my coworkers, just like, it's the idea of, oh, let me throw you a baby shower, and then at the baby shower, you're cutting all of the fruit with Pampered Chef products, and you're like, by the way, this knife is only $9.95 if you order with part of the party today,
Yeah.
and it's disingenuous. It's the idea that you're not trying to do these things to help out. You're doing it to sell a product.
Right.
And and I'm not saying all MLMs are awful, and everyone who works at the MLM is awful. There are people that actually believe what they do, and they do it ethically in a way with care, and I think that's awesome. But my experience is that most don't. And so I thought about, we do the same thing with missionary work sometimes. Is that we try to do missionary work because it's part of a ward challenge. We have a goal because the missionaries came over and asked us to pray about a family, and so we've got to find that family because missionaries challenged us. And I think that we lose sight of the purpose or our focus of what it should be in missionary work, which is to help other people and to bless their
Right.
lives. In the lesson it talks about in section 3 about how when we experience the blessings of the atonement of Jesus Christ, we're under obligation to bear testimony of Him. But it's not just about obligation; it's about the care and the concern that we have. And he lists examples in the Book of Mormon where Lehi partook of the fruit of the tree, and how as soon as he partook of it, and that tree that represents the atonement, his first thing was that he says, "I began to be desirous that my family should partake." And it wasn't like, oh, God will be so impressed if I get my family to eat this too. It was that this makes me happy. And because it makes me happy, I want to share it with my family.
Right.
Um,
I love that explanation of missionary work of you experience something so great and glorious that you want to be able to share that with other people. And I think I remember right before going on my mission, really kind of was like, okay, is this what I want to do? Do I want to go do this for 2 years? And really kind of getting that foundation of my testimony built and having that feeling. I remember sitting in I was at my cousin's house reading my scriptures, and I think I might have been reading the Lehi's Tree of Life vision, maybe not, but anyways, I had this overwhelming feeling that this was true, and I looked back on the 18 years of my life and realized what it had done to my life and how much blessings and joy it brought, and I had this overwhelming feeling to share that with other people, and I remember just like being so excited to put my papers in and be able to actually just do that full time. And coming home from my mission, I remember that it was hard for me not to be able to just go up to a complete stranger and say, hey, let's have a talk about Jesus and talk about the gospel. But I think there's so many different ways we can still do that without having to beat people over the head with it or be so direct. Because a lot of times that's just going to turn people off. Like the MLM example is a great, a good analogy for that. But and a couple months ago, you and I and a few other people, we did that Star Wars podcast about how we were excited for the new Star Wars movie, and that was because I was super excited about it, and it brought me a lot of joy in that moment. And I think the gospel is
you
a
mean you
similar.
didn't get paid by Star Wars to do that?
I wish. No, that was out of pure enjoyment or pure. But yeah, so I think that's an important thing is when we experience these things, we want to share it, and I think. But I think at the same time, we still need to be respectful of what someone else believes, and we can't just go, beat it over their head and say this is true and we're right and you're wrong.
Yeah. Where'd you serve your mission?
I served in Brisbane, Australia.
Okay.
Yeah, so it was a lot. You get a lot of different cultures there, so it was a lot of fun to teach the gospel to different people from all across the world.
Yeah. See, I served in the Midwest, and there's a lot of Protestants there, and the hard thing was is that a lot of times if you had someone with a strong conviction, conversations got, I would nicely say, less productive.
Hmm.
And it was hard because, and I didn't, I was a 19-year-old kid. I didn't understand everything yet. But I knew that those kind of conversations didn't get me anywhere. I didn't feel like I was sharing my faith, and I didn't feel like the person I was sharing with got any better understanding of my faith or any kind of benefit from it. And so I had a poor experience pretty early in my mission with that. And at that point, I was like, I learned that those kinds of conversations don't bring people closer to Jesus Christ.
Right.
If anything, it drives those involved further away from Him as they bring on that spirit of contention in those conversations. Um,
Right. And it kind of turns into us as a human being, an imperfect being, trying to convince someone else of our opinions rather than letting the Spirit really do the teaching and convert that person. And because really, Elder Bednar came to our mission and he talked a lot about how, as missionaries, we have to get out of the way and let the Spirit do the teaching. You invite, you do different stuff. But that was really impactful to me, where he was like, "Do you really think that God would just trust His gospel with 19-year-old boys? Basically, you're out of high school, you don't have your life figured out yet. He's gonna." But in a sense, that's the miraculous thing about it, is that he does allow 18-year-old young men now and young women to be able to have these experiences and have the Spirit speak through them. And I think that's important to, like you said, if it becomes contentious, the Spirit's gonna, it's not, most likely he's not going to be there to be able to help someone really understand what the gospel can do for them, or be able to even feel the gospel in their life.
yeah, and I like that you bring up that of that time on your mission and what it was that made you want to serve. That you had a testimony and you wanted to share it. I my heart kind of breaks as I see our youth, and there are some that I have seen go on missions that have been extremely stalwart and strong. I've just been so impressed by them, and I've also seen a great number choose not to serve missions. And as I get involved in kind of the online conversation around the church, it bums me out that there are those voices out there that try to say that you don't need to serve a mission, and a mission isn't that important, and diminish um, the importance of serving. And if a young man can't go, or that ends up being his choice, of course we should help and support him and help him follow the next step in his life. Just because you don't serve
Right.
a mission doesn't mean that you should be ostracized and you're a lost cause. It says, okay, well,
Right.
great. Well, how can we help you still grow closer to Jesus Christ? But I don't think diminishing what a mission is and its benefit and impact on those who you serve and yourself does any service to that. And I like in the lesson here, it says that um, President Hunter says that earlier prophets have taught that every able, worthy young man should serve a full-time mission. I emphasize this need today. And then he goes on to also invite couples to serve. But I just think that that's a mandate that hasn't gone away. That a young man who is 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, who hasn't gone on a mission yet should be preparing for that right now in his life.
Right. I agree. And it's, even if you take out the spiritual stuff that you do experience on your mission, there's so many other benefits that come from a mission. And honestly, I think another thing that Elder Bednar, when I was giving that example of him saying, God trusting the spreading of the gospel with 19-year-old boys, was a lot of it was about us as individuals and what missionary work does to us as a person, and how it helps us grow and change and really stretch yourselves and really come to, because when you're out there on a mission and you're knocking doors all day, or you're whatever it is, however you are out proselyting, it can be really hard. And if you don't know why you're there, it can be absolutely miserable, and you really have to you have to figure out why you keep doing this every day, why you keep, especially if you're not having success. And my mission wasn't a big, huge baptizing mission. We did have successes, but it was, sometimes it'd be a long time before we saw anything. And so you had to always be constantly evaluating that but it really helped strengthen my relationship with Christ. And I think that's a key thing about missionary work is that it not only helps us bring other people to Christ, but it helps us to grow closer to Him as well, because we're constantly checking in and evaluating ourselves and conversing with the Lord and teaching His gospel. And teaching something really helps you understand the gospel, I think, better than any other way.
Yeah, well, as you're out there testifying, the Holy Ghost is working on you, and it's not just working on those you teach to bear witness of what you're saying, but you bear witness to yourself as a Spirit. You feel the Spirit as you start, telling the experience that Joseph Smith had. And I remember every time on mission talking about that pillar of light over his head, and the Spirit coming in, confirming to me that it was true. And that was a testimony that I couldn't shake, because I had borne my testimony that so many times, and the Spirit confirmed it to me. It was such a strength for me. And I think that's why we need to keep doing it. Even after we come home from our missions, we need to keep sharing the gospel, because one, it benefits our testimony, but because the reason we should be sharing it is because it's made us happy. As
Right.
we've lived the gospel, we felt blessed. We felt happier. We felt closer with our family. We felt support spiritually as we've gone through hardships. And we don't own, we are the market cornered on sorrow. Everyone goes through hard times, and I just think, man, it would be so hard to go through some of the trials of my life without the support of the atonement of Jesus Christ, the Holy Ghost, and even the community of saints that I've been able to benefit from.
Right. I agreed, and I like that you mentioned there's like a lot of personal benefits that we get, and then there's through the one-on-one relationship we have with our Savior and our Heavenly Father, but then there's the community aspect of the gospel that brings so much blessings to our lives, and I think a lot of people out there are searching for that, and they need that in their lives, and that's a great way to talk to people about the gospel and help them get a feeling for it. And as I was reading this lesson, I remember there was a story my father-in-law shared with me about how he had a good friend move down to Gilbert, Arizona, which is, for those that don't know, there's a lot of LDS people there. Some areas, almost everyone in the neighborhood could be part of the members of the church. Anyway, so he had a friend move from a different state, I think it was from California to Arizona into Gilbert, and they were Catholic, and they were about the only non-LDS family in the street, and they had young kids. Most of their neighbors had young kids, and so they were excited this would be a good area, they would make friends, but they found that a lot of these LDS people wouldn't let their kids play with this family's kids because they weren't of the same faith. And they knew my father-in-law, a good friend of theirs, was a member, and so they kind of went to him and they were just like, why is this? I thought you guys were about following Jesus and loving other people, and it was hard for him to see. He didn't really have much to say to that because these people just weren't really embracing him, and it made me really sad. And I just pray in my heart that I'd never have, someone would say that, because I feel like part of missionary work is accepting people of all different faiths, beliefs, and loving them for who they are, and letting them know that we still care about them, even if they don't come to our church.
Yeah, well, that's just part of being a good disciple of Christ.
Right.
He didn't extra or ostracize people because they were publicans and sinners. He
Right.
invited them in. And I liked it. So Elder Ballard was in a conference, and he called out that type of behavior because
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
and it was awesome because I've heard the anecdotes about it, about those kinds of things happening. I just thought I don't understand how someone could be. I can only imagine that maybe they were just oblivious, because a lot of times it's not so much that we don't think to invite, or I guess to say we're not trying to not invite people. Like we don't think, oh, they're the Catholic family, they don't belong. But it's just that we just don't think about them. We have, especially in like our neighborhood that I live in now in Remington Heights, it's a lot of LDS people here, and so I think maybe we just forget. I know the people on 2 doors down, and I know the people across the street. So if I'm having something, I invite them because we're already friends. There's a relationship built in our congregation, and so I have to go above and beyond to be a better neighbor to my non-member neighbors than I do with my member neighbors.
Hmm. Right, and I think that's a good point that you pointed out, that sometimes it's just we don't recognize when that happens, because I'm sure I've been at fault at that because I grew up in a pretty predominantly LDS area in Mesa, Arizona, and my high school we had release time seminary, and so a lot of times you kind of just stick together with your LDS friends, and I think it's important. Not that that's bad that we stick together, but I think it's just important to be aware of the other people around us, and that they at least know that the door's always open, that we're willing to we'll be there for them, and show that arm of fellowship towards them.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with having good friends. But
Right.
like you're saying, but it's important that your group of friends is always inclusive and inviting of everyone.
Right.
To that. Okay, was there anything else that you wanted to add to the lesson today?
I'd like, just one thing that I just want to mention too, because they talk about the Berlin Wall coming down, in the first section of it about Howard W. Hunter kind of making a prophecy that one day the gospel would be preached even to more places than it was. I think he made this prophecy like in the late 70s. I'm not sure the exact dates, but then 10 years later the Berlin Wall came down, and I think that's another testament to missionary work, is that sometimes people have walls up, people have barriers up in their lives, and they're not ready for it right now. They're not even in a place where they can even discuss it or even think about it. But as we show forth those arms of fellowship, of being loving and accepting and of other people, and knowing that we still care about them, those walls will start to fall down. And I think that's really what I try to do in my life, is I try to just be, like I was saying before, have conversations about my beliefs, but also listen to other people's beliefs, and really just engage in a sincere conversation about our faith, and finding some of that common ground, and sharing differences, but being respectful of our differences.
Yeah, and that's kind of so one of the things that I'm working on putting together is a workshop for other online influencers and bloggers and social media presences, but also just regular members as well. But just trying to be better about sharing the gospel online. Being able to have your messages be authentic and real, not feel like you're being fake, or that you're trying to be pushy, or that you're doing this because someone else made you, but you share it because it makes you happy, and it's awesome and you want to share it, like Star Wars. you
Right.
know and it was neat. So Al Fox Caraway, she took it to a Twitter poll, and she had 729 people vote, and her question was, why don't people share the gospel online? And it was the options were fear, they don't know where to start, or they feel inadequate. So it was 18% fear, 16% don't know where to start, 10% feeling inadequate, and 56% all of the above.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think it's a real thing. Is that a lot of times we want to share the gospel online, we just don't know where to start. We're afraid our message is going to seem pushy or not real, or they just don't feel like they have the ability to do so. And so I'll have a link to it in the show notes. But just kind of that workshop, if that's something you'd be interested in, whether that's coming to speak, attending, being a sponsor, I'll put the link in the show notes. Fill that out, and let me know if there's a way you'd like to participate. But is there anything else that you want to share that's been going on your blog? Is there a new post since you last were a guest?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a couple. There's been one I talk about how tension in our life is necessary, and how sometimes we wish we could have a blissful life without any type of tension, but there's a reason for it, and so I kind of go into that a little bit. And then I've got another one coming out hopefully later today or tomorrow. I just finished a book called The Bonds That Make Us Free, and I just do kind of an overview of that book. But yeah, stay tuned. My podcast, I'm gearing up to try to get that launched in the next 6 weeks. Like I said before, I'm trying to get a lot of the technical stuff down and all that, and getting some of my guests lined up. But I'm trying to at least do a blog post a week. So yeah, you can check it out. There should be new stuff the next few weeks.
All right, what's the URL again?
It's fallingwithpurpose.word. Oh, hold on, I need to make sure I get you the right exact. I should know it off the top of my head, but
and I'll have a link to it in the show notes as well.
It's really long, and I'm trying to get it shortened. So, but in the meantime, right now, it's fallingwithpurpose.wordpress.com.
There we go. Okay. Perfect, perfect. Well, hey, Tommy, thanks for joining me again. I always appreciate it. It's always good to talk again.
Yeah, thanks for
Um,
having me.
with you. And for everyone else who's listening along, we hope that this podcast has been helpful for you to help you prepare for your lesson on Sunday, either to teach it or to participate, or if you're like Tommy and you have been called to primary or young or the youth, that you now feel like you can have something to talk with your spouse about during Sunday evening dinner. So thank you much for joining us. Also, make sure you visit our benefactors This Week in Mormons. Their flagship podcast talks about current affairs in the church and things that are going on. The most recent episode they just had is pretty compelling with some pretty controversial topics. I'll let them discuss it more than I will, but as well as they've got their primer for Sunday school called Sunday School Bonanza, where they're talking about the Book of Mormon. So make sure you stop by there as well. And so on behalf of Tommy over at fallingwithpurpose.wordpress.com, I am Grady of This Mormon Life. That's this-mormon-life.com. And until next time, I bid you all a fond adieu.